The forest was alive with hunger. Branches clawed at her skin as though the trees themselves wanted her caught. Leora's breath tore in and out of her chest, ragged and sharp, each step dragging fire through her lungs. Behind her, paws thundered against the soaked earth, wolves, relentless, snarling for her blood. The moon was high, silver and pitiless, lighting her every stumble, every desperate gasp. Rain slashed through the canopy, cold and merciless, soaking her hair, plastering it to her face. The mud sucked at her feet, slowing her when she needed speed most. Her ankle screamed with pain. The trap had snapped shut hours ago, steel teeth biting deep into her flesh before she'd managed to wrench free. Now every step was agony, leaving a trail of red across the leaves. She knew they could smell it, the scent of weakness, of prey. Still she ran. Because stopping meant capture. Stopping meant death. And yet, part of her wondered if death would be kinder. The voices behind her weren't just growls. They were words, carried on the storm. Cold, venomous whispers that seemed to rise from the wind itself. She must not live. She is cursed. The flame will burn us all. Her chest tightened. Not fear. Not yet. Shame. That same shame that had followed her since childhood. Since the first time her body betrayed her. The night the silver flame licked across her hands. Uncontrolled, wild. A fire no water could quench. She'd sworn never to let it happen again. And yet, as she tripped over a root, crashing to her knees, her palms hit the earth, and there it was. Sparks. Tiny, furious, silver sparks, leaping to life in her trembling hands. For one breathtaking second, light danced in her fingertips, wild and unearthly. Hope surged, then died. The flame fizzled, smoke curling in the rain. Power gone, just like always. Her throat burned as she choked back a sob. She wanted to scream, to unleash everything, to let the world see her for what she truly was. But she couldn't. Not yet. Not when even she didn't believe she deserved to live. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the ground. The storm mirrored her, wild and furious, as if the sky itself cried out with her. She pressed a hand to her chest, to the aching, fragile place where her heart still beat, whispering a silent plea into the rain. Please, let her live. Just one more night. My mother, let her live. The forest gave her no answer. Only the hiss of rain, the howl of wolves, the pounding of paws drawing closer. Her body gave out before her will did. She stumbled into a thicket of brambles, sharp thorns tearing into her arms, anchoring her in pain. She didn't fight them. She let them hold her, let them cage her in shadows, as she pressed herself down into the earth, shaking, soaked, broken. The whispers circled her, louder now, inside her head. She must not live. The cursed flame must die. Her breath hitched, her vision blurred, and in that moment, as the storm swallowed her, Leora collapsed. Not from fear, not even from pain. From the crushing weight of believing, for the first time, that maybe they were right, that maybe she really was nothing but a curse. And as her eyes fluttered shut, half believing death would claim her here in the mud, she let go. Before we go deeper into Leora's fate, if this story has already gripped your heart, subscribe to Clarissa Romance Collections, because this is only the beginning. The forest held its breath. Rain hissed against the earth, drumming a relentless rhythm across leaves and broken branches. But in that thundering quiet, something shifted. The wolves that had pursued her, the ones whose growls had filled the night, fell suddenly silent. No panting, no snapping of jaws, no sound of claws tearing through mud. The silence was worse than the chase, heavier, suffocating, as though the whole pack had been struck dumb by something greater than their hunger. Leora's lashes trembled as she forced her eyes open. Her body screamed in protest, every muscle quivering with exhaustion. But instinct told her to stay still, to keep to the shadows of the brambles. Her breath came shallow, slow, each inhale laced with coppery pain from the wound at her ankle. The storm crackled above her, but here on the forest floor, She felt another kind of storm building, something unnatural, something alive. From the fog that curled between the trees, a shape emerged. At first, only a silhouette, a towering frame moving with deliberate, unhurried steps. No panting, no stumble, no sound of effort. Whoever this was, they moved as though the forest bent to them, as though the mud itself dared not cling to their boots. Her heart thudded painfully. She knew stories of rogues who haunted the woods, stories of monsters who walked like men but devoured whole packs. She should run, she should crawl, limp, drag herself anywhere else, yet her body refused. Her pulse quickened, her breath shortened, but she could not tear her gaze away from that figure. The man stepped closer, and the mist gave him form. Broad shoulders, a cloak heavy with rain, hair as black as the midnight storm, and eyes, gods, his eyes, pale silver, unseeing, yet piercing all the same. They did not search, they did not wander, they landed on the brambles, on her with an unerring certainty that made her blood freeze. He should not have known she was there. She had hidden well, buried herself in the thorns, smothered her scent beneath mud and rain. And yet, his head tilted toward her, as though he could see through every layer of shadow, every shield she had left. And then, his voice. Leora. Her name rolled off his tongue, not as a question, but as a truth already known. A shiver cut through her, sharp as a blade. How? No one should know her here. She had been cast out, hunted, erased from the pack that once called her theirs. To hear her name in the mouth of a stranger felt like a wound reopened. But the voice continued, low, commanding, unyielding. Daughter of the forgotten flame. Her stomach twisted. No one had called her that in years. Not since the night the elders had whispered the curse. Not since the night they had turned their backs and left her mother begging for mercy. The words were ashes in her chest, bitter and heavy. And yet, hearing them here, spoken by this man cloaked in power, set something alight, something she did not want to feel. She forced herself to move, to pull deeper into the brambles, thorns tearing at her arms. Her ankle jolted with searing pain, and she bit back a cry. The sound betrayed her. His head turned sharply, unerringly, as if her breath alone was a beacon. And then came the howls. Not his. Not hers. The pack had returned, their voices cut through the forest. Savage, hungry, circling once more. Leora's body curled inward, bracing for the inevitable clash of teeth and claws, but the man did not flinch. His hands, long and scarred, rose slowly, deliberately, as though summoning something unseen. The first wolf lunged from the shadows, a mass of snarling fur and fury, and in an instant the man moved. His strike was brutal, efficient, devastating. The sound of bones cracking echoed through the rain, followed by a whimper that ended too quickly. Another came at him, faster, teeth aimed for his throat. He caught it mid-leap, his grip iron around its neck, twisting until silence fell again. Leora could only watch, frozen, as he dismantled her hunters one by one, not with wild fury, not with the desperation of survival, but with cold, terrifying control. Every movement calculated, every strike final. There was no hesitation, no mercy. The forest grew darker with each life he ended, shadows thick with the scent of blood and wet fur. The wolves that remained did not retreat. They circled, growling, their hatred stoked, but none dared rush him again. The man stood like an immovable wall, rain sliding off his cloak, silver eyes blind yet all-seeing. Finally the growls faded. The wolves, one by one, slinked back into the fog. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm, thick with the weight of what had just transpired. And then he turned back to her. The brambles no longer felt like protection. They felt like chains holding her to the earth. As he stepped closer, boots crushing leaves, mud, blood beneath them, his hand reached into the thorns, not gently, not hesitantly. He grasped them and pushed them aside, thorns tearing skin, drawing blood, but he did not falter. Her breath caught when his hand closed around her wrist. His grip was unyielding, firm as steel, yet not cruel. He pulled her from the thicket with ease, her body light in his strength, as though she weighed nothing. The world tilted as he lifted her into his arms. The storm beat down, soaking them both, but all she could feel was the tension in his hold, the contradiction of safety and danger entwined. His chest was solid, his heart a steady drum, and for one stolen second, she felt protected. But then his voice came again, cold and sharp as a blade against her throat. "If you stay," he said, each word deliberate, heavy with unspoken promise, "you belong to me." Her pulse stumbled. Fear, anger, confusion tangled inside her. She opened her mouth to protest, to demand who he was, what he wanted, but his tone silenced her before the words could form. "If you run," he continued, silver eyes fixed on her, though they saw nothing, "you will not survive the night." The storm raged, thunder cracked, and in his arms, Leora trembled, not just from exhaustion, not just from pain, but from the terrifying truth that she believed him. Because somehow, in his presence, death no longer felt like the greatest danger. He did. Rain slid down the curve of his jaw, dripping onto her face, as he carried her through the storm. His steps were steady, unhurried, as though he did not feel the weight of her trembling body in his arms. Leora's fingers curled instinctively against his cloak, gripping the rough fabric. She hated herself for clinging, for letting her body betray the fear that threatened to spill from her chest. The forest seemed to part for him, where she had stumbled and bled, where branches had clawed her skin and roots had dragged at her feet. He moved with ease. The fog shifted with his stride, curling back like it, too, feared to stand in his path. His silence was worse than the wolves' growls had been. No words, no explanation, only the sound of his boots pressing into the earth and the faint hitch of her own breath. Finally, she forced her voice to break the quiet, low and unsteady. Who are you?" He didn't answer at first. His grip on her only tightened, pressing her closer against the warmth of his chest. For a fleeting moment, she caught the faint scent of smoke and pine clinging to him, sharp and grounding, cutting through the metallic tang of blood that still hung in the air. When he spoke, his voice was low, measured, threaded with something that made her pulse stumble. "You already know." Her lips parted, confusion flashing in her eyes. She shook her head weakly, strands of wet hair sticking to her cheeks. "I don't sit." "Yes," he cut in, the word final, unyielding. He shifted her in his arms, and his face tilted down toward hers. Those silver eyes, blind yet unwavering, locked onto her with a certainty that made her chest constrict. "You've heard the whispers," he murmured. "The blind Alpha. The king who lost his sight, but not his throne." Her blood ran cold. The name struck her like lightning. Kaelin, the blind Alpha King, a figure of legend, of fear, spoken of in half-believed stories around dying fires, a ruler said to be merciless, his strength unmatched, his heart untouchable. Wolves who opposed him never returned, packs who defied him disappeared. And now, he held her. Her body stiffened, instincts screaming for her to struggle, to pull free before his arms became her prison, but her ankle throbbed with searing pain, and her strength was gone. She could no more fight him than she could stop the storm. Still, she forced out a whisper, sharp with defiance though her voice cracked. "Why me?" He did not flinch. His stride did not falter, but his jaw tightened, and for the first time she felt the faint tremor of something beneath the surface, anger, or perhaps something deeper. "Because," he said, voice low, heavy with meaning she did not understand, "you are mine." Her stomach dropped. The words clawed at her, tangled with fear and fury. She wanted to scream at him, to deny it, to tell him she belonged to no one. But the truth was, right now, she belonged to his arms, to his strength, to his will. Her life dangled between his fingers, and the storm itself seemed to hold its breath in his wake. The trees thinned, giving way to a clearing where the moonlight poured, like molten silver. It painted his figure in light, his every scar and shadow revealed. Leora could see now the faint marks across his throat, the remnants of old battles carved into his skin. His blindness had not come gently. It had been stolen from him in violence, in betrayal. The scars told their own story, one he carried with grim silence. She felt her chest tighten, not with pity, but with something far more dangerous: recognition. Pain knew pain. Her voice trembled when she spoke again, quieter this time, almost a plea. "You should have left me. I'm nothing to you." At that, he stopped. The sudden stillness jolted her. His arms remained firm around her, but his head turned slightly, as though listening to something distant, something only he could hear. Then, slowly, his lips curved, not into a smile, but into something darker. "You believe that." His tone was soft, almost cruel in its certainty. "You believe you are nothing. That is why they hunt you. That is why they will never stop." His words cut deeper than claws. She swallowed hard, blinking back the sting of tears that burned despite the rain already on her cheeks. She hated that he was right, hated that he could see through the cracks she had hidden for so long. Her voice broke, raw and unguarded. "My mother, she Sep's dying. She needs me. I don't have time for your games, for your—" His hand shifted, pressing against her back, firm, steady. His voice dropped, softer, but no less commanding. "Then you need me." The simplicity of it stunned her. He spoke not as a man offering help, but as one delivering a truth she could not escape. And perhaps it was true. Alone, she had nothing. Alone, she was prey. But with him? Her heart twisted violently. With him she might survive, but at what cost? Kalen began walking again, his pace unbroken, his presence swallowing the clearing whole. The storm trailed after them like a beast tamed, thunder rolling farther away, as though even the sky bent to his will. Leora turned her face into his chest, not out of trust, but to hide the battle in her eyes. Fear and fury warred with a dangerous spark of something she dared not name. His strength terrified her, his certainty unsettled her, and yet, some traitorous part of her leaned closer. Because for the first time in years, she did not feel hunted. She felt claimed, and she did not know which was worse. They entered deeper into the forest, where the mist grew thicker and the trees arched like silent sentinels. Kalen's steps never faltered, though his unseeing eyes never searched. He moved with the ease of someone who knew every route, every stone, every path. Leora's voice wavered, torn between defiance and desperation. "What if I don't want to belong to you?" The pause in his step was subtle, almost imperceptible, but she felt it. His arms tightened fractionally, enough to send her pulse racing. "You will not survive the night without me," he said. The words were neither threat nor promise. They were certainty. Cold, unshakable certainty. She squeezed her eyes shut, hating the truth of it, hating the way her body, broken and bleeding, agreed. And as the storm thinned to a drizzle, as the moon shone brighter on the path ahead, she realized something that made her heart clench in fear. It wasn't the wolves behind her that terrified her anymore. It was the man carrying her forward. The blind Alpha King. Kalen. The silence of the forest pressed close. As Kalen carried her deeper into its heart, the storm had passed, leaving only the hiss of wet leaves dripping under moonlight. His grip never slackened, steady as stone, yet every step seemed to echo against the weight of her thoughts. Leora turned her face away from his chest, closing her eyes against the present, only to be dragged back into the shadows of her past. Her mind betrayed her with memories. She saw herself again, small and barefoot on the cold floor of the pack house. The smell of roasted meat had filled the hall, but none had been meant for her. Children her age laughed at the long tables, gnawing on bones, their mouths smeared with grease, and she, thin, hollow, her ribs showing through her tunic, had been shoved into the corner. Omega brat. They had hissed. Useless, cursed thing. Her stomach had clawed with hunger that night, but worse than hunger had been the laughter. the way they had looked at her, as though she were less than human, less than wolf. And when the time came for the young ones to shift for the first time, she remembered kneeling in the mud while others stood tall. The elders had ordered her down, forcing her forehead into the dirt, while the pack cheered for those who rose, their bodies breaking and reforming into shining fur. But not hers. She had not shifted. Not then. Not ever. Her throat tightened, breath hitching in Kaelin's arms, though she said nothing. His steady stride continued, yet his head tilted slightly, as though he could sense the fracture inside her. The memory deepened, darkened. Her mother's voice came next, soft, ragged, the only balm in a world that had spat her out. Leora, her mother had whispered once, when the fever took her strength, "You are not what they say. You are fire, hidden, but waiting." The words had been light in her darkness, but they had also been prophecy, because the fire had come. Leora's stomach knotted, the memory searing. The night the pack had branded her cursed still lived in her blood. She had been no older than 10, crouched near the hearth, praying her mother's coughing would ease. Anger had clawed inside her, wild and desperate. She had clenched her fists, and then, flame. Not red, not orange, but silver, burning too bright, licking up the walls of the pack house as though the moon itself had set it alight. Wolves had screamed. Children had fled. The Alpha had roared in fury, and Leora, terrified, shaking, had stared at her own hands, glowing with a power that was not supposed to exist. Cursed, they had howled. Abomination. The scars from that night had never healed. They had dragged her out, lashed her arms, burned the mark of shame into her skin so she would never forget, so she would carry their verdict with every breath. Leora shuddered now, her fingers curling into Kaelin's cloak, as if she could hold the memory at bay. She should have pulled away. She should have pushed him, screamed at him, demanded to be set down. But his warmth wrapped around her like armor she had never known. His strength steadied the tremor in her chest. Why? Why did he not recoil from her the way the others had? Why did he not spit her name like poison? Her voice broke the silence at last, hoarse with the weight of ghosts. "You don't know what I am." Kaelin's head inclined, silver eyes turning toward her, though they could not see. His tone was calm, stripped of hesitation. "I know enough." The words lodged like a stone in her throat. Anger flared, sharp and defensive. "No, you don't. If you did, you would have left me in the dirt. You would have let them finish me." For the first time since he'd lifted her, his steps slowed. They stood in a clearing, drowned in pale light, the mist swirling like ghosts around them. He did not set her down, but his grip shifted. His hand splayed across her back, with unnerving steadiness. "Tell me," he said. Not a question, a command. Her chest tightened. Shame crawled up her throat, bile and memory churning until words spilled, jagged and broken. "They called me cursed. They branded me so the whole world would know. My own pack, my own blood." Her voice cracked, sharp with bitterness. "They said I was nothing, less than nothing, less than nothing. An omega, who couldn't shift, a burden, a mistake." Her breath shook, but the torrent didn't stop. And when the fire came, when it burned silver instead of gold, they dragged me into the square. They made me kneel. They pressed iron against my skin until it sizzled, until the smell of my flesh filled the air, and they laughed. They laughed while I screamed. Her body trembled in his arms. Rain dripped from the ends of her hair, mingling with tears she could not stop. And my mother, she's the only one who ever saw me as more, the only one who held me when no one else would. She's dying, and I can't save her. I couldn't save anyone. I couldn't even save myself. Her voice broke into silence, heavy and raw, swallowed by the night. Kaelin did not move. He stood rooted, like the trees themselves had anchored him to the earth. For a long moment, the only sound was her ragged breathing. Then his chest rose with a slow breath, and his voice came, low and sharp as steel drawn in the dark. "They broke you. Her throat constricted. She almost laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. Yes, and I let them. No, his tone cut through her words. Firm. Final. You burned them. Her head snapped up, startled by the force in his voice. His unseeing eyes glinted like twin moons, pale and piercing though they could not see her. You carry the flame they fear, he said, and they should fear it, because it is not weakness. It is power, power that made them tremble. She shook her head, desperate to push away the weight of his words. It ruined everything. It marked me as a monster. Kaelin's jaw tightened, and for the first time his voice softened, not with gentleness, but with a depth that unsettled her more than anger. No, Leora, they made you believe that. But he paused, the faintest hesitation before the final words. I see you. Her heart lurched violently, the world tilted beneath her, as though the ground itself had shifted. She searched his face, searching for mockery, for cruelty, for the inevitable recoil, but there was none. Only that unshakable certainty, and her chest betrayed her. Against every wall she had built, every vow to never let anyone close, a crack formed. A dangerous, aching crack that let warmth seep in where only cold had lived. Her voice trembled, almost a whisper. Why? Kaelin's expression did not change, his scars unmoving, his silver eyes fixed on her with a stillness that made her blood race. Because the world made me blind, and still, I see you clearer than they ever did. Her breath caught. The words cut through her like flame through shadow, too sharp, too true. She wanted to hate him for it, to shove the truth back into his mouth. But her heart was already betraying her. She vowed silently, desperately, that she would not trust him, that she would not let herself fall into the snare of his certainty, into the cage of his arms. But as his warmth anchored her against the night, as his words echoed in her chest, her pulse whispered the truth she could not admit. She already had. Kaelin carried her until the forest itself began to change. The air grew heavier, as though thick with secrets, and the trees pressed closer, ancient trunks twisted like guardians who had stood for centuries. The scent of wet earth sharpened, mingled with something older, something metallic, like moonlight distilled into stone. Leora stirred faintly in his arms, exhaustion still clinging to her bones, but the shift in the atmosphere made her skin prickle. She lifted her head, and what she saw stole the breath from her chest. The Moonstone Grove. Legends had whispered of it, an ancient place, older than Pax, older than kings, the heart of their kind. Few had walked its circle, and lived to tell of it. It was said that when an alpha was crowned, the grove itself bled light, blessing the one chosen to lead. And now, under the silver wash of the moon, she saw the stones rising from the ground like titans, pale and luminous, each one carved with runes that glowed faintly as the mist curled around them. Kaelin stepped into the clearing, his gait steady, unwavering, though his eyes could not see the glow. Yet the moment his boot touched the grass inside the circle, the air shifted, a low hum rose, vibrating through the earth, through her body, through the marrow of her bones. Then it happened. When he placed her feet on the sacred ground, her body trembled as if the world itself recognized her. The runes flared, brightening, chasing shadows back into the trees. Light crawled across the surface of the stones, weaving symbols into the air. Her breath caught in her throat, her chest clenching with panic. No, she whispered, stepping back instinctively. No, this isn't me. I don't belong here. But the grove did not listen. The runes pulsed harder when her bare foot touched the grass again. A force surged through her veins, not painful but terrifying in its intensity. Her skin glowed faintly, silver flickers dancing along her arms as though answering some ancient call. Wolves, silent until now, emerged from the shadows of the trees. They came without a sound, eyes wide, hackles lowered, as if drawn by a summons none of them understood. One by one, they bowed. Not to Kaelin, not to their blind king, but to her. Leora stumbled back, her voice breaking, raw with disbelief. No. Dawnfoot bowed to me. I septum no one. I septum nothing. But still, they bent their heads, muzzles to the earth, as though the grove itself had commanded them. Then came a voice, old and trembling, rising from the mist. A seer stepped forward, robes dragging across the wet ground, her hair a river of white, her eyes clouded by the same silver blindness that marked Kaelin. She raised a hand, palm open toward the sky, and her voice cut through the air like prophecy itself. The blind king has found his flame. Every wolf stirred. Leora's heart hammered in her chest, her skin cold, despite the heat rising beneath it. She shook her head violently, refusing the words even as the grove burned with recognition. No, stop. I don't sit. But the seer only continued, her voice deepening, carried by something beyond her own frail body. One born in shadow, cursed with fire, bound to the Alpha who cannot see. Together they decide the fate of wolves. Together they end or they begin. The words rolled like thunder across the grove, sinking into the stones themselves, etching into the night. Wolves shivered, some lowering further, others lifting their heads to the sky in unbidden howls. The air vibrated with ancient power, undeniable and absolute. And Leora? She shook as if the earth had split beneath her feet. Me? Her voice cracked, small and desperate. No, I'm not destiny. I'm not fire. I'm a mistake. A cursed Omega, who should have died in the mud. Her knees buckled, and she fell to the grass, clutching her arms as though she could keep herself from unraveling. The silver sparks danced across her skin again, brighter this time, echoing the runes in the stones. She hated it, she feared it, but she could not stop it. Kaelin stood over her, silent, his expression unreadable, yet his presence pressed against her like gravity, steady, immovable, undeniable. He didn't lift her this time. He let her kneel, let her tremble, let her battle the storm inside her chest. Why? She whispered, rocking slightly, as though speaking to herself. Why me? Why would the moon choose someone like me? Her mind reeled back to every jeer, every fist, every lash of the iron against her skin, to her mother's sunken eyes, whispering comfort while sickness hollowed her body, to the night she burned the pack house and begged the fire to take her too. No one ever wanted me, she choked. No one ever believed I was anything but cursed. And now you tell me I'm prophecy? That I decide the fate of wolves? I can barely decide if I want to keep breathing. The seer's cloudy eyes lifted, fixed on Leora though they could not see. Child of flame, it is not belief that crowns you. It is blood. It is fire. It is the truth that has always lived in you. Leora shook her head so hard her hair whipped across her wet cheeks. No. I can't carry this. I don't want it. Please. Her voice broke, raw with a plea she couldn't contain. Please take it away. Silence fell, heavy and absolute, save for her ragged breathing. And then Kaelin finally moved. He knelt beside her, his presence a shadow and a shield, his hand pressing firmly to her trembling shoulder. His voice was low, stripped of the cold command he wore like armor. You can't run from what you are, Leora, and neither can I. Her head snapped toward him, tears streaking her face, her eyes wide with panic. You don't understand. I'll destroy everything. I can't control it. I'll burn the world if I let it out. He leaned closer, his scarred face inches from hers, his unseeing eyes sharp with a conviction that pierced deeper than sight. Then burn it with me. Her breath stopped. Her body froze. His words struck like lightning. Impossible, terrifying, alive. The grove pulsed around them, as though it too heard and approved. The wolves stirred again, uneasy but silent, watching as destiny tangled itself in flesh and bone. And Leora trembled harder, torn between the gravity of the prophecy and the chains of her past. She wanted to scream that she was nothing, to tear herself free from the circle that bound her, but deep in her chest, beneath the fear, beneath the shame, something stirred. A spark. Not the wild fire that burned out of control. Not yet. But a spark that whispered she was more than what they had called her. And that terrified her most of all. The grove held its breath, the glow of the runes still pulsing faintly around Leora's trembling body. Kaelin's words, "Burn it with me," still echoed in her chest, too heavy to name, too dangerous to accept. And then, like a crack tearing through the fragile surface of destiny, the silence shattered. A howl, deep, ragged, filled with fury, cut through the night. The wolves around the circle stiffened, ears rising, bodies shifting in unease. From beyond the stone boundary, shadows spilled into the clearing. A rival pack. They came with fire in their eyes, and blades strapped to their backs, storming through the mist as though it had parted for their hatred. Their leader, a broad-shouldered brute with scars, crisscrossing his muzzle, pointed straight at Leora. His voice roared above the thunder rolling once again overhead. "There! The cursed flame! She dares stand in the grove, defiling sacred ground with her sorcery." The wolves who had bowed only moments ago began to stir, unease spreading like poison through their ranks. Whispers broke into the clearing. "She sips dangerous. She shall destroy us all. Look at the light on her skin. No wolf should glow like that." The seer lifted her hands to still them, but her voice was drowned beneath the rising growls. And Leora, her chest locked, her throat raw, felt the ground slipping from under her feet. The moment she had been thrust into was already unraveling. The rival Alpha sneered, his gaze flicking to Kaelin with cold disdain. "Blind King, you shame yourself, taking an accursed Omega? Letting her foul the Moonstone Grove? You've lost your senses. Oh, but of course, you lost more than that." Leora flinched, but Kaelin only straightened, slow and deliberate, his jaw tightening as though carved from stone. His blindness did not dim his presence. He stood taller than the rival, broader, unshakable. "She is under my protection," Kaelin said, his voice low, steady, carrying over the chaos like thunder that did not need to roar. But the rival spat into the dirt. "Then your protection is worth less than ash." The first blow struck like lightning, steel flashing in the moonlight as a blade tore through the mist, and then the grove erupted. Wolves lunged, teeth bared, claws raking, snarls echoing into the night. The sacred ground became a battlefield, glowing runes under paw and blood staining the grass. Kaelin moved like legend, his blindness no weakness but a weapon honed. He fought by sound, by scent, by instinct older than sight. Every step he took was precise, every strike of his claws brutal and unerring. A wolf leapt for his throat. He turned, catching the air shift, and snapped its neck mid-flight. Another swung a blade. Kaelin ducked beneath the hiss of steel and drove his elbow into the attacker's ribs, cracking bone. He was a storm-given flesh, relentless, untouchable, the blind Alpha King who needed no eyes to see. But Leora, she was not Kaelin. She stumbled back as snarling wolves closed in on her, their eyes blazing with fear and hate. Her ankle still screamed with pain, her body weak from blood loss. Yet she lifted her trembling hands, begging for the fire to answer her. "Please, please, just once. Come when I call you." Her fingertips sparked faint silver, the same cursed flame that had marked her all her life. But it sputtered, weak, flickering out before it could take form. The wolves saw her failure and pressed harder. "She sips powerless. Just a cursed girl playing at prophecy. Kill her before she dooms us all." Claws slashed across her arm, searing pain ripping through her flesh. She cried out, falling to her knees, her hands clutching at the wound as her blood darkened the grass. Kaelin's head snapped toward her sound, fury flashing across his pale eyes. He cut down the wolf before him and tore through the battlefield with terrifying speed. His arm hooked around Leora's waist, dragging her against him, his body a shield of muscle and fury. But even his strength could not silence the storm that had broken loose. Wolves clashed around them, snarls and screams tearing into the night. And then, over the chaos, Another voice rose, the bitter, commanding tone of the council's elder. Enough. The battle stilled, if only for a heartbeat. Wolves pulled back, panting, bleeding, eyes locked on the circle of stones where Callan now stood with Leora clutched in his arms. The elder Sip's voice cut through like a blade. This girl is not chosen. She is cursed. The prophecy speaks of flame, but flame consumes. It does not heal. It does not build. If she remains, she will burn us all. Murmurs rippled. Wolves nodded, their fear outweighing their awe. Leora felt every stare like a dagger, cutting into her already fractured heart. The elder's gaze shifted to Callan, hard and unrelenting. And you, blind king, you must choose. Your people, or your cursed bride. The words landed like stones, heavy, final. Leora's breath caught. Her eyes flicked to Callan, desperate, searching for something, anything that would anchor her. His jaw was clenched, his body rigid. She could feel the war raging beneath his skin, the tension in his grip. For one agonizing moment, he did not answer. And in that silence, her chest shattered. Tears burned her eyes, but she forced herself to stand, tearing out of his arms though her legs trembled beneath her. Her voice came out hoarse, but steady, carrying across the grove with raw defiance. I will not beg. She lifted her chin, though her body shook. Not for him. Not for any of you. You branded me cursed. You made me bow on broken knees while you fed on my shame. No more. Her voice cracked, but she pressed on, louder now, burning through her fear. I will never bow again. Gasps rippled through the crowd, shock flickering in the eyes of wolves, who had never heard an Omega speak with such fire. The elder Sep's face twisted with fury. Then you are banished. From the grove, from the packs, from our kind. You are nothing. The words struck, cold and final. But Leora only lifted her chin higher, though her tears spilled freely down her face. Then nothing is what I still be. She turned, stepping out of the circle, each stride weak but unbroken, her blood leaving a trail across the glowing grass. The runes flickered dimmer with every step she took away, as though mourning her departure. Callan did not move, his fists clenched at his sides, his jaw locked, but he did not move. And Leora walked into the dark, her heart torn open, whispering into the silence only she could hear. I will never bow again. The night pressed close around her as she staggered through the trees, her banishment still echoing in her chest like a wound deeper than flesh. Every breath burned, every step pulled fresh pain from the gash across her arm, and the bruises blossoming across her ribs. Yet she did not stop. She could not. The grove's glow had faded behind her, swallowed by shadow and distance. Ahead, only the forest stretched on, endless and silent, its canopy blotting out half the stars. When at last her knees buckled and she collapsed against a jagged rock, the world tilted. Leora. Her head jerked up. That voice, that impossible voice. Callan stood at the edge of the clearing, his chest heaving, his tunic torn and damp with blood, his pale eyes fixed nowhere, yet she felt them piercing her all the same. He had followed her, against the council, against the command. You shouldn't be here, she rasped, pressing a hand to her arm as blood seeped between her fingers. His jaw flexed, his nostrils flaring as though scent alone could tell him the truth. Her words tried to bury, and leave you to bleed out in the dark. I am banished, she spat. Though the words trembled, if they see you with me, let them. He crossed the clearing, his stride steady despite the crimson stain spreading across his shoulder. They may blind me again if they wish, but they will not take you from me. She wanted to argue, to push him away before his loyalty ruined him, but her strength collapsed before her will could. When his hands slid beneath her arms and lifted her as though she weighed nothing, she did not resist. The cave lay hidden in the cliffs beyond the river, its mouth gaping like a secret long forgotten. Callan lowered her onto a bed of moss, the cool stone wall cradling her back. Shadows flickered across his face as he knelt beside her, the faint silver glow of the moon catching the scar that split his brow. "You're hurt worse than you admit," he said, his fingers already working at the ties of her sleeve. Her breath hitched as fabric peeled away from torn flesh. "You shouldn't waste your strength on me. Your shoulder—" Later, his tone brooked no refusal. "You first." The silence between them thickened as he cleaned the wound, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle, his movements precise despite the darkness, and his sightless eyes. She watched him, unable to look away, the line of his jaw, the furrow of his brow, the steadiness of hands that had known both war and tenderness. "You fight like the old tales," she whispered, breaking the quiet. "Blind, yet every strike found its mark." "How?" He stilled for a breath, the rag-soaked crimson in his hand, then his voice, low and edged with something older than pain. "Because I was not always blind." Her chest tightened. She had never asked, not once, though the question had burned inside her since the night she first saw him. "It happened in war," he said, each word deliberate. "A rival Alpha offered truce. We met at his fire. He poured the wine himself. Poison. By dawn the world was shadow, and I would never see the faces of my brothers again." Her throat constricted. She imagined it. The betrayal, the slow darkness swallowing his vision, the weight of an Alpha forced to command without sight. "You trusted him." "I did." His jaw clenched, "and I paid the price. Not for my blindness that I can endure, but because in that moment, I saw the truth of men. Trust is a blade sharper than any steel." Her heart twisted. She wanted to reach for him, to tell him not all trust ended in poison. But what did she know of trust? She who had lived her life branded, cursed, bowed, and broken before wolves who spat on her name. Her voice cracked before she could hold it back. "My mother died believing I would never be more than what they called me. I swore I would prove them wrong before I lost her. But the moon took her too soon." She pressed a trembling hand to her chest, where her heart ached like a wound still bleeding. "That is my fear, that I will always be nothing but the curse they named me." The confession hung between them, raw and naked. For a long moment, only the drip of water echoed in the cave. Then Callan's hand lifted, slow, deliberate, as though asking permission with every inch. He found her cheek, his thumb brushing across skin, still damp with tears. Her breath shuddered, her body frozen as his calloused fingers traced the line of her jaw, the slope of her cheekbone, the curve of her lips. He touched her as though memorizing, as though the world had stolen sight but left him something deeper. "Callan," she whispered, her voice breaking on his name. His forehead dipped closer, the heat of his breath grazing her mouth. The cave seemed to shrink, the air too tight, too heavy. Every heartbeat thundered, a drum that begged for release. For one aching second, their lips hovered a breath apart. But he pulled back, sharp and sudden, his hand trembling as it fell away. Her chest heaved, her lips parted with words she could not form. "I cannot," he said hoarsely. "Not yet." The ache of what lingered unsaid, ripped through her like fire. Then his voice softened, a whisper threading through the dark. "But know this, Leora. I see you, all of you." Her throat burned, tears welled, spilling unchecked down her cheeks. "Then why," she whispered, voice raw, "does the world only see a curse?" The silence that followed was unbearable, a weight pressing on both their hearts. But though he did not answer, his hand brushed hers in the dark, hesitant, trembling, until her fingers closed over his, clinging to the one truth she had left. She was not entirely alone. The cave had been a fragile shelter, a stolen heartbeat of quiet in a world that wanted them torn apart. But dawn came too quickly. The drums of the council called Callan back to the seat of judgment, and Leora, though her body begged her to vanish into the forest and never return, followed. Some desperate part of her clung to the hope that his presence, his defense, might shift the tide. The council hall loomed like a scar carved into stone, its pillars etched with the history of kings who had stood unbroken before armies. But today, Its floor was filled with wolves whispering in sharp, cutting tones, eyes flicking toward her like daggers. Leora kept her head low, though every instinct screamed for her to run. She could feel their disdain, the way their scent soured with fear and disgust. And then it happened. A voice cut through the chamber, smooth and poisonous. "Shall we show them what she truly is?" Her heart slammed against her ribs. She knew that voice. Raynor, the beta sworn to Kaelin since the war, the one who had smiled at her, with false warmth, in the grove. Before she could breathe, before Callan could rise, Raynor flung something into the air, an amulet, cracked and dripping with some foul herb. It hissed as it burned, and in its glow, silver sparked from her skin. Her hands lit with it, unbidden, wild. Gasps tore through the chamber. Wolves stumbled back, some shifting partially in panic, claws scraping stone. The smell of fear burned stronger than smoke. "She carries it," Raynor thundered, his voice rich with conviction. "The cursed flame. Look upon her. She will burn us all." "No," Leora cried, clutching her hands to her chest, willing the fire to die. "I did not. This isn't set." But the silver blaze refused to obey. It writhed like a beast freed, curling up her arms, painting her as the monster they always named her. "The prophecy," another voice shouted from the crowd. "The fire that will consume the king. The flame that ends the bloodline." Leora's eyes darted to Kaelin. He stood at the dais, his jaw clenched, his sightless eyes turned toward her, though he could not see the inferno spilling from her palms. His silence cut deeper than any blade. "Kaelin," she whispered, her voice raw, broken, desperate. "Say something, please." But his lips did not move. His fists tightened at his sides, torn between a people who demanded her destruction and a truth only he had dared to glimpse. The silence shattered her. Raynor stepped forward, teeth bared, voice like venom. "She is the fire that will burn you, king. Cast her out before she consumes us all." A roar rose in the hall, wolves snarling, voices merging in a storm of hatred. Monster, cursed, flamebringer. The words struck like claws, flaying what little strength she had left. Shame, grief, rage, all tangled in her chest, until her breath came sharp and ragged. And then the fury broke. Her scream ripped the air, raw and primal, and with it, the silver blaze surged. The walls trembled, stone splintering as cracks raced across the chamber. Torches exploded, shards of flame spiraling upward. Trees beyond the council hall ignited, their branches clawing the sky with fire. Wolves scattered in terror, some shifting fully and darting for the exits, others falling to their knees beneath the pressure of her power. She didn't remember running, only the blur of shattered stone, the echo of voices damning her name, the hollow void where Kaelin's answer should have been. Through smoke and ash, through the crackle of burning trees, she fled into the night. Her tears scalded her cheeks, but the fire in her veins burned hotter. Love, destiny, prophecy, all of it felt like lies woven to break her twice over. She had believed, for a breath, that she might matter to someone beyond her curse. That Callan's hand against her cheek, his words whispered in the cave, had meant something. But silence had spoken louder. As the forest opened before her and the night swallowed her whole, she whispered into the emptiness, her voice brittle as glass. "I will never beg for love again, never bow, never trust." And with that vow, she vanished into the shadows, her flame marking the trees in streaks of silver fire that refused to die. The night of the full moon should have been sacred, a time for wolves to bow their heads beneath the pale light, a time when bonds were renewed and strength was drawn from the goddess above. But instead, the clearing was soaked in chaos. The ritual circle lay broken. Wolves screamed, their howls pierced with pain and panic. Blood streaked the grass where the enemy tore through the ranks. Shadowed warriors, twisted wolves from a forgotten bloodline, stronger than any ordinary pack should be. Kaelin stood at the center, sword in hand, though his eyes were blind. his body a wall between his people and the enemy that poured into the grove like a tide of nightmares. His strikes were devastating, each movement guided by instinct sharper than sight. But even a king could not hold forever. His pack faltered around him, their courage bleeding into despair. "Hold," he roared, his voice carrying above the din. "The moon watches us. Stand." But their lines broke. For every wolf that fell, 2 more shadows rose, and the air filled with a sickening chant, dark, rhythmic, inhuman. "The flame must die. The flame must die." It was in that moment, when hope guttered like the last ember of a dying fire, that the ground itself shifted. The air thickened, heavy with heat, and the shadows faltered. Every head turned. From the tree line she stepped. Leora. Her hair was unbound, wild as if the storm itself had crowned her. Her eyes glowed, not with fear, but with a silver fire that burned from within, untamed and undeniable. Flames rippled over her arms like living armor, and yet, as they licked the air, not a single leaf caught flame. Gasps shuddered through the grove. Wolves stumbled back, some bowing instinctively though they did not understand why. She looked at them all, their fear, their hatred, their broken bodies, and her voice cut through the night like thunder. "I am not your curse," she said, each word trembling with fury and truth. "I am your salvation." And then the fire answered her. Silver blazed from her palms, but this time it did not consume, it shielded. Flames curved outward, forming a barrier that deflected claws, that turned blades to ash before they touched flesh. Wolves who had fallen under poison gasped as the fire swept over their wounds, closing them, knitting torn flesh with warmth instead of pain. The pack stared in awe. Where once they saw destruction, they now witnessed healing. The shadows shrieked, their chant breaking into screams. They clawed at the fire, but it seared them into nothing. Kaelin turned toward her, his chest rising and falling like he had been waiting for this moment. His voice, low and reverent, carried to her across the battlefield. "Leora." She met his sightless eyes, and for the first time she did not feel small beneath his presence. She felt equal. When he moved to her side, there was no hesitation. He fought with steel, she fought with flame, and together they became something greater than either had known alone. Her fire wrapped around his blade, turning every swing into a storm. His strength anchored hers, guiding it from chaos into precision. Where his blade fell, shadows dissolved. Where her flames burned, her pack rose again. The bond between them ignited, not just power, but something deeper, threads woven of trust, of fury, of desperate belonging. The earth felt it too. The ground shook, stones tearing free from roots long buried. The ruins at the grove's edge split open, light spilling from ancient carvings that had not glowed in centuries. Symbols flared across the monoliths, pulsing in rhythm with her fire, with his heartbeat. The prophecy was no longer just whispered in half-belief. It lived, carved into the air around them. Wolves fell silent, even as the battle raged. Their eyes widened as the truth burned before them, the blind king and the flame-bearer. And then, as the ruins awakened, the true shadow emerged. From the cleft in the stone, a figure rose, tall, cloaked in darkness, eyes gleaming red like blood under moonlight. His voice was ancient, dripping with disdain. "Did you think the goddess would leave you unchallenged?" he asked, his words rumbling like an earthquake. "I am the first Alpha, the forgotten king. I have waited in shadow for this moment." The grove fell into silence, broken only by the crackle of Leora's fire. Every wolf cowered, even Kaelin's pack, their strength crumbling beneath the weight of the presence now standing among them. But Leora did not bow. Her flames roared higher, silver reflecting against the black of his form. Her voice did not waver. "You will not have me," she said, steady as steel, "and you will not take them." Kaelin stepped forward, his blade raised though his chest bled from a dozen wounds. He stood beside her, his voice a vow. "Then you will face us both." The grove itself trembled, the moon burning brighter above, as if the goddess leaned close to watch. And there, amid the ruin, the prophecy found its breath, two broken souls, bound not by chains, but by choice, standing against a shadow that sought to claim everything. Leora lifted her hands, fire pouring from her veins in rivers of silver. Kalen tightened his grip on his sword. And together, they faced the true villain, the Alpha, who had risen from shadow, the ghost of the first throne, the enemy no one remembered until now. The battlefield quieted, but silence did not bring peace. It lay heavy over the grove, thick as smoke after fire. The ruins still glowed with their otherworldly light, symbols carved in stone pulsing like the beat of a heart too old to die. The wolves, battered and blood-streaked, stared at the pair who stood at the center. Leora, the cursed flame who had burned and healed in the same breath, and Kalen, the blind Alpha King, whose sword dripped Shadow's blood. Breath steamed in the cold night, the full moon casting a silver sheen over scorched earth. The enemy was broken, scattered back into the dark, but what lingered was not victory. What lingered was the weight of choice. Leora's chest rose and fell, her power still crackling faintly across her skin. Embers curled around her hair, silver strands sparking like stars caught in the strands of night. Her people, no, his people, looked at her not with gratitude alone, but with something sharper, harder. She turned to face them fully. The fire dimmed from her skin, but her voice did not falter when she spoke. "Would you have chosen me?" she asked, her words rolling out like a tremor across stone. "Or feared me too?" The question hung in the air, and the grove itself seemed to hold its breath. Wolves shifted on their paws, some lowering their eyes, some staring openly as though she had bared a wound for them to prod. She swallowed, but her voice sharpened. "When the flames healed you, you did not call me cursed. When they shielded you, you did not call me monster. But now," her gaze swept across them, pinning the murmurers, the doubters, the ones who had chanted for her death only hours ago. "Now, with the fire quiet, what do you see? A savior, or a curse waiting to burn you when the moon turns cold again?" Her words cracked the silence, and it rippled through the crowd. Whispers, low and poisonous, twined with others that trembled with awe. The line between worship and terror, blurred until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Her knees nearly buckled with the weight of it. Not the fight, not the shadows, not the flames, not the prophecy, but this, the endless question that clawed at her heart. What am I to them? Her throat closed, but then Kalen's hand found hers. The calluses of his palm pressed into her skin, grounding her like roots cutting deep into earth. His grip was steady, though his body bore wounds that would have broken another man. He leaned close, his voice low enough that only she could hear, though in the silence it carried farther than either expected. "With you," Kalen whispered, the raw edge of his voice trembling with something more than exhaustion. "I am no longer blind." Leora's breath caught. For a heartbeat, everything else fell away. The fear, the whispers, the ruins, the weight of prophecy pressing down like a crown she did not ask for. All that remained was the heat of his hand, the truth in his words, and the strange, fierce tenderness that bloomed in her chest, despite the wreckage surrounding them. But the pack did not vanish. The ruins did not fade. The shadow's warning still echoed in the cracks of stone and the blood-streaked grass. And as Leora looked out at them, she knew the question was not hers alone. It belonged to every wolf who would walk away from this grove, carrying her image in their memory, deciding for themselves whether she was salvation or destruction waiting to unfold. Her gaze swept the circle one last time, her voice soft but unyielding. "Choose," she said. "Not for me, for yourselves. Choose whether you will stand with fire, or run from it." The night air hummed with silence once more. And as the moon lowered, casting its final light across wolves who could not yet decide, the question lingered like smoke that refused to leave the lungs. Was she savior or curse? Only time would tell. And so, as the story dims into ember, remember this: If Leora's fire set something burning inside you, if her voice carved a place in your heart, do not let it fade. Subscribe to Clarissa Romance Collections, where every tale is written in fire, in shadow, and in love. Because this story is not the end, it is only the beginning. Dawn broke with reluctant fingers, bleeding pale light across a battlefield scarred beyond recognition. The grass lay charred, ash floating like restless spirits on the wind. Wolves limped in silence, their paws dragging through soot, as though every step threatened to sink them deeper into the ruin of what had been. Leora walked at the center, Kaelin's hand steady at her side. Their silence was not emptiness but weight, an unspoken awareness that something had shifted in the marrow of the world, something too vast to name. The ruins no longer glowed, yet they did not dim entirely. The carved symbols shimmered faintly, as though hiding their true message for those patient enough or foolish enough to wait. Every wolf felt it, even if they would not say it aloud. The grove had not closed its story, it had only paused. Leora's skin no longer burned with power, but the memory of it lingered like an aftertaste of lightning. She had healed, she had saved, she had destroyed. She was flame and ash both, and though Kaelin's hand anchored her, she could not silence the voice in her chest that whispered, "They will never choose you without question. They will never forget the fire." Kaelin did not release her. His grip was the only thing that did not tremble in that broken dawn. His blindness, once a prison, had sharpened him to truths others missed. He felt her hesitation in the tension of her breath, her silence louder than screams. His jaw clenched. He would hold her steady even if the world cracked in two beneath their feet. And the world answered. The first tremor came as a sigh beneath the soil, a subtle shudder that rippled through the wolves' paws. They froze, ears flicking, hackles lifting, but the ground was already splitting. The fissure crawled outward in jagged lightning lines, slicing the ash-covered earth until it reached the very heart of the ruins. The wolves cried out, stumbling back. Some shifted, claws scraping stone, eyes wide with primal fear. Kaelin drew his blade instinctively, the steel singing as though it knew what the earth itself had begun to reveal. Leora's breath hitched as fire sparked beneath the crack, not her own, but something darker, red as blood and old as bone. It pulsed once, twice, and the air turned sharp with the scent of iron and smoke. Then came the voice. It did not echo from throat or form. It rose from the very shadows clinging to the fissure, curling upward like serpents of smoke. Cold, unyielding, unshakable, it rolled across the grove like a curse too ancient to fight. She is not the only one marked by fire. The wolves staggered, ears flat, whimpers caught in throats too proud to release them. The words slithered into every chest, coiling around every spine. Leora's knees nearly buckled, not from exhaustion, not from fear alone, but from the recognition that the voice carried weight beyond her, that her curse, her gift, was not singular, that she was not alone in this burden. Kaelin pulled her closer, his chest a shield against the unseen, but even he, steady as the mountains, could not still the way his heart thundered. The truth they had clawed toward through blood and prophecy had not yet been revealed. The fissure widened, coughing smoke that writhed into shapes, almost human, almost wolf, almost nothing. In their shifting, Leora glimpsed eyes, amber, ancient, burning with a hunger that had outlasted centuries of silence. The shadows leaned forward, and though no body gave them weight, their presence crushed the grove. The true Alpha, the voice rumbled, as though mountains themselves bent to speak, has yet to rise. Leora's throat closed. Kaelin's grip tightened. The pack backed away, fear shattering whatever fragile unity the night had won. But the voice did not finish. It sank back into the fissure with a final hiss, shadows collapsing inward until only smoke remained. The earth shuddered once more, then stilled, as though it had swallowed its own secret. Silence returned, but not peace. The wolves dared not speak, not even to comfort one another, not even to demand answers. Their breaths rose in harsh clouds, their eyes fixed on Leora, not only with fear this time, but with a question sharper than before. If she was not the only one marked by fire, then who else bore the flame, and what kind of alpha was yet to rise? Kaelin sheathed his blade, his jaw tight, his eyes unseeing, yet locked upon the horizon as though he could trace the path of prophecy in the air itself. Leora lifted her chin, though her chest felt hollow. Her fire was not enough. Her fight was not over. She had thought the shadows were the end, but they were only the first ripple. The dawn brightened, indifferent, spilling light across a world that had shifted in silence. And in that fragile moment, as the wolves began to scatter, as the ruins cooled to ash, as Kaelin pressed his forehead briefly to hers in a vow unspoken, the truth carved itself into every heart present. This wasn't over. Not by fire. Not by blood. Not by prophecy. The true Alpha had yet to rise. Will you be ready when the fire returns?